I want to start off the show with something that many of you have written me about, have messaged me about, have emailed me about, whatever. I'm going to start the show off by talking about Jon Schaffer from Iced Earth doing his first interview in over 4 years. Now, obviously, for those of you that follow the show, you know that Jon has been a big subject on the show. I had a whole entire discussion, like a roundtable discussion with two really good people, Christian Wentz and Justin Roth. We talked about Jon's situation, how he can restart his career. We went through all of that. And of course, I made my opinion very clear about what I thought of Jon, the impact that he's had on me as a music fan. And I had a lot of viewpoints, and mostly speculative viewpoints, because we haven't heard an interview from him until now. Very recently, an interview was put out. Jon talked about everything, and that interview was a pretty deep one. So I'm going to give you my thoughts on that interview because a lot of you have messaged me about it. And I'm also going to talk about a couple of things that I personally feel I was wrong about when speculating about Jon. And even one of the criticisms I had about Jon, I'm really not as, how shall I put it? I'm really not as adamant about that criticism anymore. In fact, I think I was wrong about something I criticized him for. So I'm going to kind of retract that and tell you why now that I've seen an interview with Jon. So with that said, let me recap some things. First of all, watching him talk, you can tell, and listening to him talk, you can tell this man has been through some shit. I mean, let's call it what it is. He's been through a lot over the last 4 years, especially for somebody who pretty much his biggest crime was trespassing. Looking at the lawsuit, listening to Jon talk, Jon was in the Capitol building no more than 5 to 10 minutes. Jon did not hurt anybody. Jon did not beat on anybody. He pointed his finger and yelled at some people. He ended up getting tear gassed or pepper sprayed. I don't remember what Jon exactly said about that. And he was in and out of that building very quickly. And the next morning, the guy wakes up and finds out he's on the most wanted list. The man was in solitary confinement for a little over 3 months under some pretty horrendous conditions. There have been a lot of strained relationships. You know, he talked about that in the interview with family. His career was pretty much destroyed, not really destroyed completely, but obviously it was put on hold. And the income stream from that career was obviously pretty much not what it was, obviously. And of course, he had to pay for a legal defense. So the man over the last 4 years has more than paid for what ultimately is trespassing. And that is it. Let me get that out of the way, because there are idiots out there calling this guy a terrorist. He's definitely not, especially when a lot of those people that are calling this guy a terrorist for walking into a building and yelling at some people are the same people, many of the same people, condoning people torching Tesla dealerships or getting out and beating people up or assaulting people or intimidating people driving Teslas, who, by the way, probably voted against the same person that they don't like. And there's a lot of hypocrisy that goes into that. There's a lot of hypocrisy when the fact that you had so many government buildings over the summer before this whole Capitol January 6th nonsense happened, where people breached those buildings, where people did billions of dollars in damage to a lot of cities out there. And I want to put that in perspective, because Jon walked into a building with a can of bear spray and a water bottle, didn't hurt anybody, didn't kill anybody, yelled at some people, got pepper sprayed, and left. I want to make sure that is abundantly clear, because for whatever reason, you have a small group of people that are holding on to this ridiculously stupid narrative. And I'm going to get into that a little bit later on. Now, were there people at the Capitol that did probably did some stuff they shouldn't have? Absolutely. Not even going to say that that didn't happen. But in Jon's case, considering he was all of about 4 or 5 sentences in a very large lawsuit, all he did was walk in, yell at some people, and leave. Go home, take a shower. Went to the hotel, took a shower, went home. So I'm going to talk about his interview, folks, because there's a lot that I took from it. It was a very deep conversation, and there's a lot to get into. And again, there was a criticism I had of Jon that now, hearing him speak about it, I don't really have that criticism of him anymore. So let's start off with, what did I think of the interview? Obviously, Jon has definitely been through some stuff. But what the biggest thing that I took from this interview had nothing to do with any of the books he talked about, which I've read most of those. It had nothing to do with the January 6th stuff. It had nothing to do with any of that. You know what it had to do with? Jon talked about doing a lot of self-reflection. And the one thing that forces people to change their lives for the better and do a lot of self-reflection is for something not only traumatic to happen in your life, but for you to go through such a bad experience you hit beyond rock bottom, further down to where you could ever imagine you would be. And I say that because I've been through that. I'm not going to go into the complete details of my own experience and what happened. I'm just going, for those of you that know me, you probably know what I'm talking about. But let's just say I came within an inch of instantly losing my life. And as a result of everything that happened with that, I took a long look at my own life, who I was as a person, and I made a lot of changes for the better. I am definitely not the same person I was. Now, this happened probably about 5.5 years ago. Yeah, around 5.5 years ago now. In August of this year, it'll be 6 years. So from that aspect, I can relate to Jon, because basically during that interview, he talked about doing a lot of self-reflection. And I guess when you're in solitary confinement under some bad conditions for 3 straight months, you're going to have a lot of time to do a lot of self-reflecting. And that's what he did. And I believe, despite all the nonsense he had to deal with over 4 years, he has probably, from what people told me that know him, he's become a better person as a result. So I can relate to him when it comes to that. And there's another aspect of this interview I can also relate to. He talks about the fact that he found out who his real friends were when he hit a massive low point in his life, when all this happened. He refers to the people that he was in a band with, his bandmates. He refers to, probably generally other people that were part of his life that pretty much abandoned him. And I'm going to go into more detail on that because of the fact that there's an aspect of that I'm going to refer to when it comes to, his, former, band members, because that was something I emphasized and talked about numerous times on this show. But essentially, I found out the same thing when I went through the experience I went through. Now, I want to keep in mind too, folks, what I went through is nowhere close to what Jon went through. I can tell you flat out right now, listening to him talk, I didn't go through anything close to what he has dealt with. But I can relate to a lot of what he said in this interview from that aspect alone. So let's debunk a couple myths. And I'm going to basically go back and admit that I am wrong about one aspect of this as well. So one of the biggest criticisms that, first of all, when I did all of these discussions about Jon on my program, I would say 95% of the people that made comments or wrote me about it, the amount of people that were just happy about the fact the guy's out of jail and want to see Iced Earth come back was astounding, because I was expecting to get a ton of people coming after me over even bringing the guy's name up. You know, like Justin Roth talked about a guy having a meltdown just bringing up Jon's name on a podcast, which will never come out, when he was on doing the discussion with myself and Christian. But I'm going to be honest, there's a couple of myths we need to debunk. Now, one of the criticisms, this was one of the few criticisms that were brought up in the comments, is that, you know, in all of these press releases and articles that were coming out about Jon, they were talking about Jon going into witness protection. They were talking about Jon and the fact that he's a sellout and he's selling out his fellow Oath Keeper members, et cetera, et cetera. But then when you hear Jon's side of the story, he had no information about anything going on with them. He was a member, but he wasn't, like, he didn't know the ins and outs of what was going on. He had no information to give them. So in reality, he didn't turn on anybody. Because here's the thing, and for those of you that are saying, oh, well, Jon says that, but he probably did. Well, guess what? Jon isn't in witness protection. Pretty much it's very evident what church he goes to. So if he really had any information and he was ratting anybody out, he probably would be in witness protection, but he is not, which means he did not have any information, and it means that he did not rat anybody out. So let's put that to bed right now. The next thing he talks about is the band members abandoning him. Not everybody, but some of his band members abandoned him. If I were to look at the personnel list of people in Iced Earth, if you look at who was in the band at the time, I'm pretty sure I could probably pick out the one or two people that probably abandoned him, right? But I'm not going to go into detail on that. But for the sake of argument, let's talk about that. My biggest criticism of Jon, and Justin brought it up in the roundtable discussion we had, which was, by the way, a great thing to do because there were a lot of different aspects to this that I never had thought of, is the fact that he put his band members in a bad position by doing what he did. Now, I was very critical of that. In fact, I've mentioned that numerous times. That was one of the things, because what I did is I initially made a statement about it when it happened, and then I shut up about it until Jon made his first statement, because it wasn't fair for me to talk about anything until he actually made some kind of statement. That was a statement through his lawyers. But now listening to him and what he said about that, he was talking about these band members abandoning him. And here's how I took that. There was a point in the roundtable discussion about Jon, which I'll put in the show notes, by the way. Christian talked about the fact that he doesn't believe anybody there would have known that that whole January 6th protest would turn into the fiasco that it was, or that it would be made out to be as big of a deal as they made it out to be. Jon said the same thing. He said he went into the building and he was out. He didn't think it was that big of a deal. He figured, okay, I got pepper sprayed. I'm done. I'm going to go back home and go about my business. Then dude wakes up one day. He's on the most wanted list, has to call a lawyer and surrender himself, because he did. He didn't go on the run, didn't avoid authorities. He took accountability and he went and surrendered himself. That was something the judge said in his court documents, if you look at his sentencing hearing, because I read all of that. I don't think he realized that this would be as big of a fiasco as it was, because I think if he did, I think there is a good chance cooler heads probably would have prevailed, and he may not have walked into the building. He may have protested, but he may not have gone in there. So now knowing that, my perspective has changed on that. Because I don't think he knowingly would have, now this is just me, I am speculating, but I do not believe this guy, if he would have known by simply walking into the building, would have ruined his career, would have potentially ruined him financially, and would have had an effect on people he was in a band with, he might not have done it. He might have protested, not walked into the building. He might have left. And he would have probably had another album written about all the ridiculousness that has gone on over the last 4 years. So my stance on that has softened quite a bit. So listening to that interview, he's obviously found religion. Some people made some critical comments about that. Here's my thing. I'm not the most religious person out there, but if that is what makes you a better person, if that is what makes you reflect on your life, if you find something in anything, religion, it could be anything, philosophy, that makes you a better person, all power to you. He's obviously found something in religion, in God, in Jesus, that has really changed him as a person, probably for the better. From what people that I know have told me, and from listening to that interview and watching that interview, I believe that this is exactly what has happened with him. Now, a couple other aspects of this I'm going to touch on really quick. There was a list of books that are in the comments. I've read probably 3/4 of those books, not all of them. There was one he recommended. I can't remember what it was now. I did order it on Amazon because I ordered like 5 books on that list that I hadn't read. I've read most of that stuff. And the interesting part, and I've read books that actually have to do with a lot of what Jon talks about and what's listed in there that he doesn't have listed in there. But what's interesting is that a lot of that stuff, you have seen a lot of alternative media and podcasts that are now bringing more and more of that stuff to light. And so what I hope happens is that once Jon gets himself settled in, once he starts talking more, once he starts doing more interviews, I really hope that he also continues to talk about those things that, he's been talking about, starting with the Sons of Liberty album. I think it's important. Now, I could sit here and talk for 7 hours about all of that stuff. I have friends of mine that follow it closely. I have a lot of friends in bands that follow it closely. But I'm just, folks, I would definitely check out the list of books listed in that first interview that he just did. I'm going to put that interview in the show notes because there's a lot of very eye-opening stuff there. I started reading a lot of that stuff probably back in 2014, 15, 2016. There's a couple of those books that are super long. And the problem with me with books isn't that I have a lack of attention span. It's the fact that, like, if I go and start reading something, I drown everything out for like 2 or 3 days. And unfortunately, with everything going on in life, I can't do that. So I suggest checking those out because there is a lot of truth in that. A lot of truth. I've studied a lot of so many different aspects of this. And a lot of what Jon talks about in that interview, he does go into, not into super detail about it, but he definitely does touch on a lot of that. He did talk about, the election, the stolen election, as people call it. And his thing, and this is something that I think should be noted, because he felt that the election was possibly stolen in 2020. I'm using his words, not mine. That it would have been equally as bad if the election had been stolen from the Democrats. Jon's an American. Jon already acknowledges that both political parties have a lot of people that are corrupt. And I agree with that. I am a nonpartisan. I am not somebody that completely worships the Democrats or the Republicans. I'm not. Politics is the new religion, folks. People have a religious aspect. There's a religious following aspect to politics. And I don't worship one party or the other. I'm an independent. 25 years ago, I was considered a liberal. Now I'm considered just right of center. And my political views have not changed. So he did say something like that. And I think it's important that, because people think he's automatically some Republican, and he's not. Because he talks about how both parties are pretty much corrupt. But Jon believes in the Constitution. I agree with him. He believes in the right to protest, and that's what he thought he was doing until suddenly his name is all over the news, his face is all over the internet, and then we have this situation. And I'm going to go into one last aspect of this. I'm going to go into the haters, the pearl clutchers, the people that are holding on to this narrative that Jon is some kind of terrorist. I don't know about you folks, but we're like, people that think he was a terrorist and they were going to take over the government, and somehow everybody there was going to overpower all the intelligence agencies and the military. Come on, folks, really? The United States has the best military. We have the best intelligence agencies in the world. We have the best law enforcement agencies in the world. You know what else we have? The most armed citizenry in the world. Now, last time I checked, when people want to take over a country, they're going to be armed. I didn't see Jon with a rifle. I saw him with a can of bear mace, which is really more of a defense thing than anything, and a water bottle. And there are people still clutching to this narrative that he's some kind of terrorist. And the thing that's funny about that, Christian Wentz brought this up in our discussion, which again, as I'll say, is in the show notes. He said that the people that are really complaining about this are either people that already didn't like Jon and are looking to kick him when he's down, which there are a lot of those people. There are people that have worked with him at record labels and I'm not going to name any names, that are doing that, which says all we need to know about their character or lack thereof. But you also have people that are grasping onto that narrative because they don't want to let go of that narrative because they don't want to be wrong. Because when people feel they are wrong about something, they feel like power is being taken away from them and it hurts their ego. And those people are like the one squeaky wheel out of the 4,000 shopping cart wheels at Walmart. They make the most noise, but it's very clear, a clear majority of people support Jon, want him to come back at some point and create music again and inspire everybody like he did before. And they're not grasping onto this. In fact, the interesting part about that is when I looked at my original post, when it all went down, all of it, I looked at my original post, people that were commenting, being critical of Jon, saying he'll never listen to Iced Earth again, those same people are saying they want him to come back. Many of them, actually. Now, Jon talked about people having to drop their ego in this. I agree. It's a very difficult thing to do. You have to pretty much train yourself to let go of that. I am somebody that had to do that. I used to have an ego that was pretty destructive to me progressing as a human being. But I let go of that 5.5 years ago when I had a wake-up call. So that's pretty much where I stand on the interview with Jon Schaffer. I wish him the best. Hopefully one day I will be able to talk to him on this program. Jon was one of many bands in the very beginning of this show who were very cool to me, who treated me really well. And he was one of many people who my encounter with him was positive. It made me want to continue to host this program as a radio show for 25 years and now as a podcast. And that's where I'm going to leave it right now. One last thing. When he talked about these haters that were going after him, a lot of these haters are going after his band members. This is something I left out, forgot to say. When Jon says the band members abandoned him, I don't think he was talking about them initially, like quitting the band when they were getting the cancel culture mob coming after them. Folks, I remember looking at the Blind Guardian page. I was in the comments sticking up for Hansi Kirsch. There were people calling Hansi every name in the book, making threats, all sorts of stuff. And he probably had no idea what the hell was going on. He probably didn't know what was going on with Jon. Now, I don't know what their relationship is now. Maybe they've talked. But when Jon talks about band members abandoning him, my guess is he's talking about when he ended up getting out of jail, making contact with them. He's talking about the people that wanted to have nothing to do with him. I don't think Hansi is probably that person. I could be wrong. But Hansi in an interview even came out and said Jon deserves a second chance. And Hansi was always a good dude to me. Again, he's another one, just like Jon and quite a few other bands out there that I had on the first year I did this show, that are the reason this show has continued for almost 30 years. So I wish Jon the best. I hope, the damage has been done. Sadly, he's one of the fortunate people to get out of jail quickly, because there are people that were thrown in there without any due process, without their constitutional right to a speedy trial. And as Jon mentioned in the interview, those folks had defense attorneys, and this is Jon's words, not mine. They had defense attorneys that hated them and did not want to represent them. It's a very sad story. When I was watching that interview and listening to it, there was a bit of sadness in that interview. There really was. But I look forward to hopefully seeing Jon making music yet again. I hope that he reissues some more of Ice Dirt's back catalog. It'd be really cool to collect some of that. I think it would be cool to even reissue some old shirts and old shirt designs. I know he's selling some vintage shirts on there now, but this has been a crazy thing to have happen to somebody, and it's a perfect example. I understand wanting to make an example of people that went and protested. Were there people there that took things too far? Yes. Were there assets there escalating things? Absolutely. Because that has come out. But overall, I just hope Jon does well. I hope he makes a comeback. There are people in the metal scene that have done far more egregious things than him, who for whatever reason don't get tons of backlash. I don't know why. But I really hope he creates music again and inspires people again in the same way that he did before all of this happened. And that's where I'm going to actually leave it now. Hey everybody, Tony here from the Metal Command podcast. Again, I appreciate your support. Since 1998, I have hosted this show in one form or another, starting off in radio and now in the podcast format. Again, thanks for watching, and if you like what you see and hear on this show, by all means, please hit the subscribe button, hit the little bell to be notified anytime I do post a video, and if you see this program on any other form of social media, please give me a follow there. Again, I always appreciate your support.